Hello, welcome to Non-Dual Christianity. In this video, I want to talk about God forsaking God, or what's sometimes referred to as the double kenosis. This comes from Mark chapter 15, in verse 34, where Jesus says, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And then in verse 37, it says, "Jesus uttered a loud cry and breathed his last, and the veil of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom." So what does this mean? And what is this idea of the double self-emptying of God? Well, I think there's 4 layers to it, and I will not be talking about some of the messianic psalm references like Psalm 22, or what the writers are trying to do to convince their audience that Jesus was the Messiah. What I do want to talk about is how this seems to highlight 4 growth stages in the spiritual path, or the understanding of who God is. So the first stage, or layer 1, I would call that there's now global access to God. So this tearing of the temple curtain from top to bottom means that no longer do you need to be a Jew, a priest, a male, whatever other ethnic or circumstances you were born with or without. Those don't keep you from God. God is not exclusive. You now have global access, because in the temple system, there was all these dividers between humans and the divine presence, which was in the Holy of Holies. Tearing of the curtain means global access. Layer 2. I will call this the divine is pursuing you. So whereas perhaps we thought that since we were separate from God, it was humans who were most wanting to get to God, so to speak, this tearing of the curtain from top to bottom, right, from the divine to the human, accomplished through Jesus, who is the divine, I would argue shows that God has been pursuing humans the whole time. And this meeting place between the divine and humans, the sacrifice of atonement, the mercy seat, which is the lid of the Ark of the Covenant, it's not something that has been sort of removed or kept from humans by some barrier from God's side. It's that humans have not actually wanted to meet God in the first place, due to their own ignorance or sense of separation. And this seems to expose that human attitude for what it is. God is pursuing us. Those first 2 layers are significantly different from the third, and this is where the double kenosis, or the double self-emptying, comes in. Because what it shows is, all along in layer 1 or 2, we assumed it was about proper relationship to God, which also assumes that somehow I exist separate from God. Layer 3 would show something different. Whereas the first kenosis that we talked about in Philippians 2 seems to be God emptying himself of his powers, the double kenosis is God emptying himself even of the idea of God, because it's about being. So when the temple curtain tears, the Holy of Holies is empty. God is not there. This whole time, people have thought they were pursuing a sacred object, thought that if they could just get it, then life would be fine. And yet what they were going after was nothing. It was empty. And the reason, I would argue, from the non-dual tradition, is because there is nothing to get. We ourselves are the divine nature. As soon as you try to pursue the divine nature, you have already mistakenly believed you're separate, so you're not going to find it. You already are it. There's nothing to lose. There's nothing to gain. Whatever you might think you lack, it is best to embrace that lack and realize you're already the divine. And to stop pursuing whatever sacred objects you think might make you whole, or might make life better. Now, this is not to say that you cannot interact with the world, or that you can't pursue things that look desirable to you. But it is to say, realize that you will not find God, and you will not find fulfillment outside of yourself, because you are already what you most hope to be. That's layer 3. Layer 3 is really giving up the false sense of separation, my ego personality, and identifying with that as myself, and realizing my essence, my being, is the divine. They're one and the same. Layer 4, I believe, is spoken to with Jesus saying, "Why have you forsaken me?" Jesus very clearly felt one with the Father, and that was very blissful, I'm sure, transcendent. And this seems to be now the final step, where even though he was not identified with his ego self, there's still some sort of a perspective that was separate, or a vantage point that was not the full divine vantage point. And it seems like the crucifixion was him going through that final transition and resurrecting as a oneness with the divine from an experiential standpoint that was perhaps not there prior to the crucifixion. I'm not sure I can say much more because I have not experienced that myself, but it would seem like it was a giving up of his divine self in a way that was unprecedented up until that point. So 4 layers. Hope that's helpful, and perhaps you can even ask yourself, in which of the layers do you currently find yourself, and how do you experience God? Thank you for exploring this with me today.